All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to Office Hours with Michael Kitces. So I want to talk today about what I think was kind of a little noticed announcement last month that the CFP board has elected several new members to its board of directors as part of its annual process. Now, it's not new. The CFP board elects new members of its board of directors every year. And frankly, for a lot of our industry association groups like FPA and NAPFA, there's frankly not that much focus on new board members. I mean, it may signal some internal shifts in the organizations, but generally it's comprised of members of the organization who are practitioners, and there aren't exactly a lot of surprises. Now, the CFP board, on the other hand, is a little bit different. It's a larger organization, more diverse stakeholders, so breadth of board members actually matters more to balance perspective of stakeholders. They're not literally a representative government structure, but it's important to recognize just the diversity of CFP board's board of directors. And it's also notable because CFP board's bylaws actually have an explicit requirement that at least two have to be public members who are not CFP certificates, not part of the financial services industry. Nominally, their role is to provide kind of the consumer public's perspective on whether CFP board is on a reasonable track or not in fulfilling its duty. But from a practical perspective, these outside public members are often leaders of other organizations who can provide connection, strategic relationships to outside partners. And so in this context, the recent announcement for CFP board's latest couple of additions to the board of directors, I think are really notable. So the first interesting addition to the upcoming 2017 slate of board members are Doug King and Jack Broad. So for those of you who are familiar, Doug King is the CEO of Cetera Advisor Networks, which by rep count is one of the 10 largest independent broker-dealers. And Jack Broad is the head of the Financial Advisor Services Group at Vanguard that works with RIAs and previously led Vanguard's retail advice business. So the predecessor to what we now know as the $40 billion digital advice platform called Vanguard Personal Advisor Services. Now, what's significant about these gentlemen is that they represent what I would call large firm financial planning interests. They are both CFP certificates, but substantially different than virtually all the other CFP certificates on CFP board's board of directors, who are almost all practitioners. And with independent advisory firms, these gentlemen are from large firms and in executive roles. Now, on the one hand, I think that's actually a good balance. A lot of CFP certificates are in large firms, not just the independent channels. They should all be at least implicitly represented on CFP board's board of directors. But on the flip side, this says to me CFP board is really taking seriously the needs and demands of CFP certificates at large firms. And I think the addition of Vanguard to the CFP board is especially notable, right? This was classically an asset manager that's now on the board of directors of the CFP board. And, as I've written in the past, I think this is because we're seeing a transition for Vanguard right now that ultimately I think is actually going to be one of the greatest threats to independent advisors. That's right. I actually said it's a threat. Not because they're a bad company. To the contrary, it's because they're a very good company with a great brand, organized as a mutual owned by its investors and possessing no profit motive. So in the past, they used that size and that scale and that lack of profit motive to create incredibly low-cost solutions for consumers and advisors and have a lot of advisor adoption. But now, increasingly, they are an advisor, along with the retail divisions of Schwab and Fidelity and increasingly TD Ameritrade as well. And so suddenly they don't just make products for advisors. They compete with advisors. And if you doubted at all this shift of Vanguard from asset management into financial advice, the fact that they would put one of their principals up to the CFP board's board of directors should be a pretty clear indication of their direction going forward. In case the hundreds of CFP certificates already working in personal advisor services platform wasn't enough to persuade you. Now, the good news, frankly, I think, is that in a few years, we're going to see firms like Vanguard become the backbone of the standard financial advisor entry-level career track. Just as in the accounting world, you join one of the big accounting firms, you work there for a couple of years, and then you decide what you're going to do with the rest of your career. I think we're going to see the same thing form out of firms like Vanguard and Schwab and Fidelity. And I think CFP Board is recognizing this as well with the addition of Vanguard to the board of directors. But that's a major shift, both for, frankly, CFP Board and for Vanguard. Now, the next significant addition to the CFP board's board of directors are Susana Duarte de Suarez, who runs a global communications firm called Media Immune Communications, and Dane Snowden, who's the chief of staff for the NCTA, which was the National Cable Telecommunications Association, now the Internet and Television Association. So basically, these are folks in the business of media, PR, and communications. Kind of an interesting thing, since, as you may recall, CFP board takes about $10 million of our collective certification dues every year for a public awareness campaign after they put through an 80% increase to do it back in 2011. Now, at the time, that was actually really controversial, and as many of you may recall, I was actually very strongly in favor of the public awareness campaigns. At the end of the day, the CFP marks really don't mean that much until the public understands what they are, and it's the CFP board's job to do that. I think historically they relied too much on FPA and NAPFA and other groups to beat the drum about the CFP marks. I think it was a good thing that the CFP board took up the initiative for itself. And frankly, the last tracking data that we have is that it's working. There has been a material increase in public awareness of the CFP marks. The total brand awareness for CFP marks now amongst the mass affluent is actually approaching the CPA license, which is some amazing progress. But then what do you make of an organization that's spending $10 million a year on a public awareness campaign and then brings onto its board of directors a director of a global communications firm, and an executive at a media association? I think what we're going to see is a next stage of the public awareness campaign in the next year or two. That doesn't necessarily mean a dues increase or anything. It could just be coming up with new ideas and new directions on where to deploy that $10+ million a year, as the original public awareness campaign was really meant to target just a subset of mass affluent clientele. So maybe CFP board's going to broaden the message, expand the public awareness campaign. I know there's some distrust of the public awareness campaign. Again, I do think it's a good thing, but I also think we're on the cusp of something new. There's some new stage that CFP board is building towards with the public awareness campaign when they specifically bring folks from the media industry into the board of directors. Now, the last significant addition to the CFP board's new slate to the board of directors is Denise Voigt Crawford, who previously was the Texas State Securities Commissioner for 17 years and also a former two-time president of NASA, the North American Security Administrators Association, so the membership group for state securities regulators. So what does it mean when CFP board starts building a relationship with the former leadership of state securities regulators? I think what we're seeing is some of the groundwork getting set for advocacy for financial planning professionals to make a push for state regulation of financial planning. There was a lobbying effort for regulation of financial planning a couple of years ago. After the financial crisis, it was a push for federal regulation, and the Financial Planning Coalition was lobbying to get recognition of financial planning into Dodd-Frank legislation. Unfortunately, all the Financial Planning Coalition actually got was primarily sections 913 and 914 of Dodd-Frank, which basically raised the question of whether investment advisor exams should be increased in order to study about whether consumers are confused about the overlap between investment advisors and brokers. And basically the conclusion of Dodd-Frank was RIAs definitely need to be examined more. The RAND study was pretty definitively concluded that virtually no consumers have any idea that there's a difference between fiduciary investment advisors and brokers subject to a suitability standard. But now 5 years later, investment advisor exams barely moving. The RAND study's basically dead. No movement for federal regulation of financial planning. The best we got was DOL fiduciary, which only came because the SEC wasn't acting. So now the question arises, if you still want to continue to move forward regulation of financial planning and actually be recognized as a financial planner instead of just the products that we happen to implement, and who can hold out as a financial planner, and you raise the question of what's the path forward, state regulation is a potential path. Now, it's a difficult one. No regulator likes to cede power. One of the primary challenges to getting federal regulation is neither the SEC nor FINRA nor other regulators want to let go of their role. And that's why, frankly, I think the potential for state regulation may actually be better than federal regulation. It's messier because we work across lots of states. I don't know very many RIAs out there right now that enjoy the process of registering in new states every time you cross the de minimis limits on the number of clients in that state. But it is a path to regulation. And if regulators don't like ceding their power, then the only path realistically is that we'd have to work with state securities regulators, perhaps to integrate financial planning advice under investment advice or as an extension of investment advice for state securities regulators. And so lo and behold, the CFP board's board of directors adds Denise Voigt Crawford, a former state securities commissioner and former president of the North American Securities Ministers Association. Now, I want to be clear. I don't think this means a state regulation initiative is happening immediately or imminently. Frankly, most of us are still digesting the consequences of DOL fiduciary, which hasn't even hit yet. But I think you're seeing some of the groundwork be laid in place, that the push from CFP board and the Financial Planning Commission the Financial Planning Coalition for federal regulation of financial planning seems to be dead at this point. And that, the fight for state regulation may be what looms next. And ultimately, I think that would be a positive. Nobody likes more regulation, but recognize the point of pushing for regulation of financial planning is not to add more layers of regulation. It's actually to subtract them. It's because the way we work right now, where you're regulated by which products you implement. So if I use insurance, I need an insurance license. And then if I use securities, I need a securities license. And then if I give investment advice, I need an investment advisor's license. That's actually a horrible way to regulate financial planning. Our current framework sucks. And so the potential, at least, is that regulation that's actually built for financial planning advice could be better, simpler, leaner, and more relevant to what we actually do as financial advisors in the real world. So we'll see what ultimately happens, but I think you're seeing some major shifts coming from CFP board, gearing up for large firms, gearing up for the public awareness campaign to go to a new stage, and gearing up for what could be a fight over the next 10 years around state regulation of financial planning. Now, ultimately, CFP board still wants its stakeholders to come along. I think the organization, frankly, still has its own issues with lack of transparency, lack of accountability around particularly their process for changing where it knows the 4 E's, the education, exam, experience, and ethics requirements. And the reality is, particular, if regulators are going to honor and recognize what the CFP board has done, the CFP board needs to operate more like a regulator, which has a public accountability process. So public comments are open for everybody to see, and major changes of any of the 4 E's would have to be initiated with stakeholder input. But nonetheless, the progress moves inexorably forward, and I think you're seeing some potential new progress coming soon. So I hope that helps a little as food for thought in looking at the new slate of the CFP Board's Board of Directors. This is Office Hours with Michael Kitces, 1 p.m. East Coast time on Tuesdays. Thanks for joining us today, and have a great day, everyone.